Well, Razorback fans, we know that Razorback football is in its off season, getting ready for a very important season. I don't know if anyone knew this. Ryan Silverfield is the next and newest head coach of the Razorbacks, trying to figure out exactly what he's going to do in this conference as well as in his first season. And to talk more about that, let's go ahead and welcome in a very great friend of the show. His name is Connor O'Gara. He is the host of the OG Kickoff, talking all things college football, but specifically SEC football and Razorback football is what we're going to talk about today. But Connor, it's been a while, man. How is everything going in your world?
Everything's good. We're staying busy. Got a lot of different things that I'm going to be doing this fall, it looks like. And yeah, man, kind of just seeing what's out there in college football, but staying, like I said, staying very, very busy even as we sit here in the end of May.
Well, it was funny because I know me and you texted about it, and I know that Razorback fans were interested anytime that it's, hey, anonymous coaches quote season, essentially is what it turns into. I find it fascinating for these quotes. Some people think it's lame. Some people think it's like, oh, if you're going to say something, put your name to it. I want your thought before we dive into the specifics. What do you make of the anonymous coaches quotes? I mean, we're in the content business. We know it's good for content, but do you think it's fair? Do you think it's foul? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? What do you make of those things whenever it's anonymous coaches talking about other coaches or programs in the SEC?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I really do because there are a lot of things based on my experience that coaches will tell you under, and I'm going to butcher, how do you pronounce this? I can never pronounce this right. Anonymity,
Just
anonymous
sounded great to
status.
me.
Sure, you get what I'm saying. But I think there are a lot of coaches that don't necessarily want to get up in front of a podium and say, "Hey, this is how I feel about this team," or an uncandid like, "Hey, I actually really think this team is going to struggle here. Really think they're going to struggle there." And I think that being able to have content like this, which isn't necessarily hurting someone, is a really good look into it because you and I can sit here and we can talk about our insights and we could say, hey, we're hearing this, we're hearing this. It's different to hear it from a coach that's actually there on the sideline or someone that's involved in the program, or sometimes it's general managers who are talking about these guys and they have insight into all these different personnel decisions and stuff. And so I think it's really interesting from that standpoint. It doesn't always have to be taken as gospel. I mean, there are certain coaches who obviously that aren't as well known. And so sometimes the quotes about them aren't necessarily these crazy in-depth things. But to me, I think it still very much has a place in what we do. And I don't really think it's a cowardly thing to like speak about this. I think it's just trying to provide some insight. And I think that's what hopefully stuff like this does.
Well, I think it's great insight and also just kind of makes it fun to try to guess who said what, even though odds are most people who try to guess it end up being wrong. But specifically about Ryan Silverfield, there were a few quotes from this Athlon Sports article and dealing with each and every coach of the SEC. I thought the first one being, quote, they're not considered a sleeping giant. Ryan Silverfield is a great coach who might have taken the wrong Power Four job at the wrong time. Now, I don't know how many people would ever really consider Arkansas a sleeping giant. Maybe they're just a sleeping normal person. Like they're not one of those places that's just going to come out of nowhere. But as far as more specifically, the might have taken the wrong Power Four job at the wrong time. What do you make of that statement? And could there be a possibility of some truth behind that with Silverfield taking this Arkansas job, which, let's be honest, Razorback football has not been highly relevant in this conference for over a decade.
Yeah, I think I mean, if you just strip down some of this of non-sexy hire at a program that just went 2-10 in a conference that we know has chewed up coaches and spat them out. I think you could look at that and go, all right, that's not that crazy. That's not that bold to say something like that. It's basically saying it's an uphill climb. It is going to be an uphill climb for Ryan Silverfield. Now, these conversations can change. A year from now, we could have a lot of different coaches that are looking at Arkansas going, man, I didn't really have high expectations for them. And look what they did year one. I was really impressed because I didn't really think that they were going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. So, like, that's how these conversations can change. And in a way, maybe it's kind of a good thing because, man, so often we're wrong about this. We're not particularly good, and I say we as a collective whole, athletic directors, boosters, former players, media types, like anyone you want. We're generally not very good at trying to project which first year coach is going to be great. And so, is it a death sentence that someone came out and said that I think he might have taken the wrong power forward job at the wrong time? No, it's not, because Lord knows there have been plenty of hires that we've looked at and gone, well, that's going to work. And then it's Scott Frost at Nebraska. And then you realize, oh, it's actually not going to work. And it's going to be absolutely terrible. I think that it's okay that that's where the conversations are at right now. If those are still the conversations in year two and year three, that's an entirely different story. But it speaks to what I think the national expectation of Arkansas is going into 2026, which is low, and it's going to continue to be low until you see Ryan Silverfield beat some of these teams that we don't expect Arkansas to beat.
Well, and it's so great of just timing of everything. As we know, Arkansas has one of the toughest schedules, tale as old as time. I don't even know if we even need to bring it up anymore because it doesn't matter. It's always every year. But it's like, hey, your first year is when we introduce a 9-game SEC schedule. And also in your first year, guess what? Your first SEC game against the Georgia Bulldogs, arguably the best team in the SEC. They have some other games too, 5 of them at home. They got to go to Utah. And that was something that talked about also in these anonymous quotes of saying, hey, if you look at their SEC schedule, the 9 teams they have to play are pretty daunting. But then you add in Utah, it doesn't set up for year one success. So I'm with you. We never know. Sometimes year one coaches or first year coaches can surprise us, but do you kind of see it to where, Ryan Silverfield may be all right? Ryan Silverfield may end up being great, but because of the schedule, because of the situation, year one is going to be a pretty brutal task for him to have success in.
Yeah, and here's the challenge, and I've talked about this with you before. Ryan Silverfield is much more experienced in the one-score games, or at least winning them, than Sam Pittman. So if you look at it from that standpoint and say, well, that's good. That's something that you would hope a new coach would be better at and just right the wrong of his predecessor. But the problem is, if you're not involved in those close games, you're not really going to see that play out. And you can't just automatically copy and paste last year's team and last year's situations into what this year's team is going to endure. Lord knows there's been a ton of turnover with that roster. And so I don't necessarily think that's a fair expectation. And in a way, maybe that'll be less painful than being like, oh, hey, it's a 7-point game in the fourth quarter. How is this going to go wrong? What do you always tweet? Like, surely only normal things will happen at the end of this game. Or, that's just the way that it has worked out. And Arkansas has been as snake bitten as any program in the country in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably more so the daunting issue is knowing that the schedule just does not give you any sort of room for error. And yes, he's going to get time. Like, it's not just going to be, oh, after 1 year, you're on the hot seat or something like that. But at the same time, you don't necessarily have a 5 and 6 year window. You need to have some sort of proof of concept year one, because you know that you're going to have a lot of turnover in the portal. You know you're going to be able to try and recruit to that. And you'd ideally like to have some roster retention and have some guys that are like, hey, these guys were worth investing in. And you need to try and find that year one. That's what's going to be really important for Ryan Silverfield, more so than if he's able to go 7-5 or something like that. It's just be able to check some of those boxes early on and don't feel like this inevitable close loss is going to happen every time it's a 7-point game in the fourth quarter.
Which is perfectly segue into it because the record that I believe is Arkansas is 17-49 in one possession game since 2012. Man, it's amazing if you just would have won half of those games you lost, the type of program it would be viewed as. But that's kind of been the aura of Arkansas, close, but yet so far, just one play away or whatever it is, which kind of led to the other quote, or at least the final quote from these anonymous quotes from Athlon Sports, where a coach said Silverfield has always had excellent offenses. It talks about putting their quarterbacks in a great position to make checks and reads. He's very calm on game day and very, very bright, where he understands the endings of games and how to handle those situations with timeouts. That seems like a very duh thing. Of course, yeah, every coach, you want to have that. But to me, if you've been a team in a program that's lost that many close games, not every one of them are created equal, but there's probably been a lot of occasions where you just haven't had whether it's the coach or the vibe or the situation to succeed. And maybe that's where Ryan Silverfield can really succeed at Arkansas, and maybe year one and maybe throughout this entire thing. If he's that detailed, late game situations, maybe we won't see as many one possession losses for the Razorbacks.
X's and O's can only take you so far. They can. I mean, if you don't believe that, then tell me why someone like Lincoln Riley has just, for whatever reason, struggled in some of the intangible areas of being able to build up his program. And I do think that there is something to be said for that, of having a coach that in those moments, you feel like you're not going to be, all of a sudden just getting on your show or something like that right after a game ends and just blasting the decision making. There is something to be said for having confidence in who you are as a coach to recognize that, hey, in this spot, it was not necessarily smart to go for it on fourth down, or hey, we opted for a field goal in this spot and I kind of ignored the offensive momentum. Like, you hope to avoid those situations if you're Ryan Silverfield. And that's going to be one of the defining things for his tenure at Arkansas is he going to be better in those spots, in those clutch, gotta have it type moments? Do you have someone that you feel like is in control? And Arkansas fans saw up close. It was the death sentence for Sam Pittman that game against Memphis, where they lost to Ryan Silverfield, a team that did not say die in those moments when they were down 3 scores against an SEC team, and they easily could have. And instead, they just found a way. And maybe they were certainly they were the benefactors of some fortunate situations, some fortunate bounces of the football, literally. But at the same time, I think that Ryan Silverfield did a good job in those moments, and I think he's going to at least bring some sort of sense of calm in those late game situations. How many Arkansas will be in year one? TBD.
Yeah, that's the ultimate kicker is you could be great in those situations, but if you're not in those situations at all because you're getting blown out, it doesn't really matter. So, but one of the final quotes, and this was actually part of a different quote, but this is what I wanted to end, at least with these anonymous quotes from, is saying from a particular coach that it's not set up for year one success, that said, in this day and age, if you don't have year one success, narratives get forced upon you that you've got to find a way to shake. I think it's interesting that a coach takes that approach, and who knows, maybe this came from a coach that had this happen to him. But I mean, is there truth to that, where narratives just get forced upon you if you don't have year one success? Because I think that it's easier to win immediately now more than it ever has before with the transfer portal and everything. But it's also about having an expectation and trying to build something. But do you think there's any truth to that? And do you think that you're going to see Ryan Silverfield having to fight off those narratives that's going to be forced upon him if he doesn't have that high level success, or at least some success in year one?
I think it depends on the situation. I think narratives are determined by what you walk into. Jeff Lebby, when he was sitting there in year one and unable to win an SEC game, was not having narratives forced upon him because there was an expectation. Look, this is a rough situation that he inherited. They had to pretty much overhaul that roster post Zach Arnett, going 3 coaches in as many years, with the death of a coach being a reason why you got to that point. It was part of the reason why Mississippi State was there. And I don't think people looked at that and went, oh, yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, like, we're just out on Jeff Lebby. If year one Lane Kiffin doesn't meet expectations and doesn't necessarily live up to all the offseason billing and the $40 million roster, $40 million or more, that they've spent, doesn't yield a playoff berth, there will be narratives about Lane Kiffin. It's all about situation. And there are certain things I think that Ryan Silverfield can probably, what's a kind way to say this? He can avoid if he's just sensible. And if he's getting up there and just blowing it in post-game press conferences, or he just doesn't seem like he has a clue, there will be narratives. There will be narratives. And if you don't believe that, go back to the Chad Morris era. Lord knows I don't have to remind you or your audience about that, because I remember hearing things at the end of year one going like, man, I try and not rush to judgment with some of these year one coaches, but that ain't good. And I don't really see a light at the end of the tunnel for that. And I'm not saying like I expected year two to play out the way that it did. Shout out Ty Story. But there is there is a sense that I think that he's going to be able to avoid that, simply because everybody understands the situation that he inherited at Arkansas is just different than what we're talking about at LSU, or even what we're talking about at Auburn, where I think Alex Golesh bringing over the roster that he did and being able to retain DJ Durkin as his defensive coordinator has people feeling like Auburn's in a different spot, even though Auburn is in the midst of its worst 5-year stretch since the Harry Truman administration. So it all just kind of depends. Context is going to be important. Context is always lost, though, on the average college football fan.
Well, I want your thought on this, because you've been watching and covering college football for a long time. If you just sat there and said, hey, Arkansas went 5-7 this year, and that's all you knew about it, there would be a way of approach. Some people would be like, hey, hey, that's improvement. Some people might say that's not acceptable. So, everyone have their thoughts. But to me, it's like not every 5-7 is created equal. There's a difference between starting off 5-3 and then losing your last 4 games, or starting off where you're sitting there at 3-4 or whatever you want to say, but you end strong and you beat his Arkansas's last two games against Texas and LSU. Not saying they'll win one of those, but even it's the same record doesn't equal postseason. To me, people can be a lot more excited about ending strong from a 5-7 season than starting off strong and ending weak from a 5-7 season, even though it's all the same. Do you feel like there's some sense in that, and that if it was something that Silverfield was going to have people really buying into him, it's like if you're going to go 5-7, make sure it's about how you finish more so than how you actually get started.
I think if Arkansas goes 5-7, there will be a feeling of stock up for Ryan Silverfield. And maybe that's saying I think the expectations are really low. I think we look at this and agree that it is really low. And he is not considered some offensive wonderkind. It's not like you're all of a sudden going to overhaul things and you expect this drastic overnight change on that side of the ball. And that's kind of what dictates year one expectations. I mean, let's call it what it is. And that's why like Will Stein in Kentucky kind of has a little bit of a different vibe in terms of what you could potentially see year one. I already mentioned Alex Golish at Auburn. If you're that person that like calls plays and has like this proven track record offensively, then there's an understanding of like, wow, things can change really quickly, especially if these dudes know how to evaluate at quarterback. So, yeah, I think that there's a chance that 5-7 would be considered like, all right, that chapter's over. This new one has begun. Vibes are better. There is at least some sort of an identity. There is a path moving forward at the quarterback position, TBD on what it looks like. KJ Jackson, AJ Hill. AJ Hill's still 18. Isn't that crazy? I looked that up right before we came out because I was like, I knew he was young. He's still 18. But there is a sense, at least, that Arkansas could be going in the right direction if 5-7 is there, and if they win one or two of those games, which that's kind of we're talking about winning multiple games that Arkansas is not expected to win, right? I mean that would be like, oh hey, maybe you get a year one coach, at Utah or something like that off guard, and maybe that's the type of win. So yeah, there's definitely going to be interpretation within 5-7 or within 4-8 even, and it's not to say that we're handing out participation trophies here or doing anything like that, but I think that it'll be kind of understood around the conference of like Arkansas would actually be doing a lot of things pretty well and rising above some of those expectations if 5-7 was in store.
Well, last one before I let you get out of here, and you kind of alluded to a little bit, is always about the quarterback battle. Arkansas, even though they've had their struggles, the one thing that they've always known for like the past close to 10 years coming out of spring is who the starting quarterback was. They never, whether it was Taylon Green or KJ Jefferson or Felipe Franks or whoever, it's like they always had an idea of who it was going to be, and they were able to get behind it. That's not the case right now, as KJ Jackson and AJ Hill battled out in the spring, but nothing's been named. I still think it's probably going to be KJ Jackson, but we'll see how fall camp. But what do you just make of that particular quarterback battle? And is it a good one? Like, is it a one you want to see a battle out because of how much talent there is, or is it by default? Just what do you make of that particular situation, and how important is it to Arkansas' success this year, especially with a first-year head coach?
Yeah, I want to see it play out, and I do think that I think you're right. I think KJ Jackson's going to end up being the guy. Very difficult for me not to say KJ Jefferson. Lord knows I've said the name KJ
Yes.
Jefferson many a time with you. KJJ, it's just come on, that's tough, and especially a KJ and an AJ in the same quarterback battle. I'm sure we'll be butchering names all throughout this battle and the way that it plays out. But yeah. I'm curious to see how this goes because you're talking about someone that obviously has experience in the offense, and that's what AJ Hill has, a former four-star recruit who isn't typically the type of guy that you expect to see at a Group of Five program, and very limited reps last year, not necessarily reps that all of a sudden made you feel like, oh my God, this guy's a bona fide star, but everything is new, and it's all going to be about system fit and being able to handle the speed of the SEC, and you won't really know that until we see this play out. So like you could see KJ Jackson run away with this and they're naming a starter early in fall camp. I'd fully expect to see something like that, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that's kind of how this played out. Memphis has also had a very solidified quarterback position if you want to look at kind of the way that it's played out under Ryan Silverfield and even before that with Mike Norvell. So yeah, I mean, I do think that there are probably going to be people looking at it. It's like, hey, this is bottom two, bottom three quarterback situation in the SEC, just because there's a sense of skepticism. When you have a lack of experience in that battle, I do think that that's going to be part of this. And, as much as I would love to just be able to say, well, hey, look at what KJ Jackson did at the end of that Texas game. Wasn't he kind of fun? And didn't this feel like a guy that you could build an offense around? I still need to see more out of him. I would still need to see more out of AJ Hill as well to make me feel like, man, they could play at an all SEC level or something like that. You know, last year, Taylor Green, I think that he made a lot of mistakes, but he was one of the bright spots, and it still led to 2-10. And it's a reminder, even if you have the quarterback situation figured out, even if you feel like you have something unique, there are a lot of other things that go into this.
Yeah, and I think that that's what confuses Razorback fans is like they get players that look good and they get players that are unique and fun to watch and everything, but it doesn't matter because you still go 2-10. It's just very strange. So either way, let's hope that there will be a time whenever we catch up, Connor, that it'll be like positive things about how great the team is and how great the program is, not about them trying to claw their way back into relevance, especially coming into the SEC. But either way, we'll see how it plays out. Got a fun football season. I know SEC Media Days is coming up here soon, so we're always looking forward to that. But it is Connor O'Gara. He is the host of the OG Kickoff. Connor, as always, appreciate you joining us. Enjoy a little downtime before it gets crazy of the football season, man. But we'll be catching up with you later down the road.
Thanks, man.